Abagnale Jr. It was Abagnale all along. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Emily and you are at the home of the Forever Theater Kid, and we are back with another Bloody Broadway. This is my series where I combine my two loves, musical theater and true crime. If you can't get with it, there's the door. I don't have time today. The world is a show, and I undeniably over it. So, we're gonna talk about another piece of today. If you like true crime and you like musical theater, then you're at the right place. Hit subscribe. I dare you. And also follow me on all my socials. And hit that like button. Tell me down below if I look like a floating head. Yeah, I kind of do. This floating head is going to talk all about the lovely movie, kind of okay musical, Catch Me If You Can. The story of Frank Abagnale Jr. The teenager that literally got away with everything. So kids, if you want to hear Auntie M get pissed at a shit ton of white privilege, stay tuned. All my sources for this, as always, will be listed down below. If you feel the need to fact check me, go for it. There's no trigger warning. Unless white privilege is a trigger warning for you. This is just a tale about a little brat that got everything he wanted because he was mad at the world. And then continued to thrive. All right, Frank Abagnale Jr. was born on April 27th, 1948 in Westchester, New York. So literally right outside the city. They were starting to build major highways and interstates, and it was just like hugely expanding from the 50s to the 60s. White suburban America is really just starting. The idea of wealth and material possessions equaling worth and value really play into Frank Abagnale's mentality. He grew up with a father that really gave him anything that he wanted. He lived an extremely comfortable middle-class life. His father ran a stationery store in Midtown. Very glamorized idea of living that suburban life, but working in the city. Apparently, America was great in the 50s. I didn't know. It sounded like a lot of racial injustices were happening and a lot of gender inequities. Don't even get me started on the queer community.
Don't even get her started.
Don't!
You know, it was really, really great for one particular type of person. Frank Abagnale and his father were white straight men. Wow, Dad, I love what you do. I love everything you're doing. And Dad's just toss. I know I'm living the high life. Just follow my footsteps and it's gonna be pie for you. And Frank's like, I love pie. However, the perfect life that we, are expected to believe was in the 1950s was not so perfect. Mom and Dad Abagnale got divorced, which can be very, very traumatizing for a child. It's a little different from the movie. Frank's mission is to basically parent trap his parents. Frank's mom is just this French lady that, I'm dressed as Frank Abagnale's mom. Frank's mom was just no. Frank actually moved in with his dad after the divorce. The image of Frank's father, he idolized his dad. But when he actually watched how his dad conducted business from the inside, he was just oh, my dad's not as cool. So Frank moved to New York with his dad. Frank saw how he was dealing with these quote-unquote colorful characters that his dad was working with. I'm very curious, what are colorful characters in the stationery business? What are they? Was it a front? Was it a drug front? You better get that glue that you put on the envelopes. Frank Jr., the sponge, he was just taking it all in. Frank learned that the rules could very much be broken, and you can bend them to get what you want. Can I get a white privilege? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, my dude. So Frank learned the importance of maybe he wasn't book smart, but being street smart. He learned how to be wise and charming. He learned how to use his style to womanize and get what he wanted. He learned this within 6 months of living with his dad. And that behavior that he learned started to show itself in very small cons. But most of these small cons, news alert, would be expunged. Because whiteness. Don't you dare come for me in those comments and be like, maybe he just didn't do things. No. He was a little shit. Okay? He was a little shit. So Frank started engaging with a bad group of kids at school. And they started to become like a reckless group of kids. And by 14, Frank stole a car. Like, that's just like, don't do that. That's a slippery slope. So they kind of gave him this like semi-scared straight type of mentality. But like at the end of the day, Frank's record was yet again expunged because daddy didn't want his son's career to be messed with because of a silly little mistake. Well, age 15, Frank was just starting to like dig the ladies, and he was just like, ooh, I'm a catch. But he didn't have any money for dates because who has money at 15, truly? So he would like beg his daddy to get him a gas card. Basically like a debit card for strictly the gas station. It was more of a credit card. You would pay it at the end of the month. Frank Baby June, realized that he could actually use it not just for gas, but also to just buy things at the shop, at the gas station. He like got in on it with like the guys that worked at the gas station. The con was, it was like he bought stuff on the card, he sold the stuff back and got cash back for what was supposed to be on the card, and then somehow split the money with the guys so that they wouldn't tell anyone. He's 15 years old and he's figuring this stuff out. And he's deciding to like go through with it. After 3 months of this shenanigans and it basically raining down cash on Frankie June's, the bill came back to the father and it was for $3,400. Remember, we're in the 50s. So back then's monies, it was about $30,000. Guess what happened to Frank? Abso-fucking-lutely nothing. Frank Sr. paid it in full and literally did nothing to hold his son accountable. But Mama Abagnale, whatever her beautiful French last name was just like, nah. They put Frank in the private school for troubled boys. That was a great Moira.
So 5, 6, 7, 8, Patty.
Which was a boarding school. And they fought for custody because Mama Abagnale is like, you're a bad dad. I'm sure going through things such as experiencing your parents' divorce, crying out for help, because when it comes down to it, like these acts are him crying out for help when he's a kid. When you're not given consequences for your actions and you're in that mindset already, you're gonna keep pushing the boundaries just to see what you can get away with. And you're a young man and your prefrontal cortex has not developed properly yet. You're gonna keep pushing that boundary. So we make boundaries. So I can only imagine that Frank Jr. did have emotional damage from the divorce, was trying to act out, was trying to get help. And then you go into a place which is oppressive in its own way, and I'm sure it was abusive in some ways. There's gonna be emotional damage. And that is kind of clear, but at the same time, it's just like, this could have been prevented. In the time that Frank is in his like schoolboy prison, Daddy Abagnale had to close the store. I wonder why. Maybe it was the $3,400. And your crimes? Zaddy was broke and he started to work at the post office because you gotta make money the way you gotta make money. And the post office, the postal work was a government job, so benefits galore. But this downgrade, a downgrade in terms of like the idea of what success was in the 50s, this pivot that Zaddy Abagnale had to do was such a downer for Frank. And he was just like, oh, my dad went from like owning his own business and thriving and like working with like colorful characters and like taking them out to lunch and spending shit tons of money and like buying champagne and doing all this and like trying to like make himself look like the richest guy in the room. Now he's working for the post office. Ew. He was just like, I vowed to never let that happen to me. Frank Jr. was all about wanting money and power and that lavish lifestyle that in his eyes was more important than his relationships. And we see Frank a couple of times in the movie meeting up with his dad and giving him money and being like, I can buy you a new car and blah, blah, blah. And the relationship throughout his entire 5-year con, yes, it's only 5 years, they continue to meet up and stay very close. In reality, their relationship is completely severed. They don't see each other again. So at age 16, I believe, right? Because that would mean, hey Siri, what's 64 minus 48?
64 minus.
Yeah. So at age 16 in June 1964, Frankie June drops out of his school, hops, skips, and jumps over to New York City. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have any prospects. He doesn't have a place to live. He only has $200 to his name. But I don't know. Who else thinks that he's just gonna be just fine? This girl. Ding, ding, ding. Money was running out. It was running out quickly. But the last thing that Frank wanted to do was, well, number one, live on the street. And number two, he didn't want to have to go back to his parents. He changed his ID and his driver's license, I believe, from his birth year 1948 to 1938, because he's just like, 26 is like, I'm going to start thriving. So instead of manifesting, I'm just going to jump ahead to age 26. And it was actually, oh my God, my dog is so cute right now. Oh, look at that sweet little baby. Oh my God. Okay, it's a little puppy time. Although, like, he was only 16 years old, he looked older because his hair was graying. And then, like, didn't everybody in the 50s just look like they were, like, already 45? Like, it just felt like people went from, like, looking like they were 14 to, like, age 45. There was no in between. So his hourly wage went up a little bit, and he would also just start cashing checks from his savings account just to, like, make himself feel like he had some money to spend. And that still wasn't enough. No, still wasn't enough. So he was like, I guess I gotta just start, like, taking money that's, like, not mine. So that's when Frank started doing what's called check floating. Check floating is when you're writing checks for the money that you don't have. And you're basically going to the bank, having them cash those checks, and then you bounce. Because it would take a few days for the bank to be like, wait a second, you don't have this money. And then Frank is like, just a puff of dust. So then he started to take on new identities because he was good at changing shit on his ID. So he was just like, I can make new IDs. Yeah, America must have been so great for him. So he would go back to the bank 2 or 3 times per day and basically just take out small amounts whenever he was first forging checks, which kind of makes me go like, would that be suspicious? Like, how would that not be suspicious to you? He was really good at forging checks, and it seemed legit. And so he just kept doing it more and more and more and getting deeper and deeper into this con. Like, Frank is getting, like, so confident and so arrogant. And he's just like, oh, my God. I'm so good. So Frank started impersonating different types of careers. A wild accusation. I think this one was first. So if you've seen Catch Me If You Can, you know he's very famous for impersonating a pilot with Pan Am. But before he did that, I guess he would just like hang out at the airport, because people did that back then. Like, people just like hang out at the airport. Like, I think my parents went on dates at the airport. It's a choice. But it must have been very romantic back then. But he would notice how airlines and how certain like businesses would have a drop box for money collections. The people who were closing out the businesses every night would like drop wads of cash into this drop box every night. So companies like United Air and Hertz car rental, they would drop them off at in this drop box. They would drop it off on like airport premises. Imagine like this like little mailbox where they're like, here's all this cash. Bye. And Frank was like, that's free monies for me. So this was his idea. He gets a crappy uniform, impersonates a security guard, age 16. And he writes this like, probably like on a freaking like, I'm just imagining like on a piece of like a napkin. He attaches this note to the drop box that says out of order to drop off your money with the security guard on duty. And people fucking did it. It is a drop box. How could a drop box be out of order? Come on. They think America was great. America was just dumb. But we're not victim blaming. But come on. Frank was actually surprised. He was like, how does this fucking work? Like, Frank was the one that was literally like, you know, it's a Dropbox, right? Like, how does a Dropbox go out of order? But it worked. And he just got like free monies. Just free monies. What we know Frank for, the infamous Pan Am scam. When he was 16, still 16, began to score free flights around the world. I think it was called, so it was called deadheading, where basically if you were a pilot, or I would probably assume just a pilot, you would basically be able to like ride in that super uncomfortable, real sketch seat in the cockpit, where it was just like a piece of plastic. It was like a plastic folding chair with a seatbelt. You get to ride around free on any flight. Not only was he impersonating a pilot and getting on a free flight, but he started like getting more information. I will say what Frank did is that he was extremely good at like researching his options. He would dress up as like a student, which was easy, and he would like interview executives that worked at Pan Am and get all the inside scoop on just like how to be a pilot, what do pilots do, What are their special treatments for pilots? Blah, 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 blah. And so he was getting the inside scoop by impersonating like a reporter for a school. And then was like, well, I have to get a uniform. I have to look the part. So he was able to pick up an authentic uniform by saying that his got stolen in a hotel. And they were like, oh, this happens all the time. And so they just give him a new uniform. They're just literally giving this kid handouts. There was a time that he got apprehended in Miami for his ID. Frank insisted that he was, at that time, Frank Williams was the name he gave himself. And he's so fucking charming that he befriended all these pilots and they're like, that's Frankie Williams. Let him go. They let him go. They vouched for him and people would just believe pilots because pilots were just kind of like held up to this like higher regard. Not only was Frank able to fly free, but most of the time he would get free hotel stays because they would like, a lot of hotels would just give free stays to pilots. He would get free food and lodging because he would just send the bill to Pan Am for them to pay for it. This type of behavior just seemed like he was just a kid. Again, a kid pushing his boundaries to see what he could get away with, to see how far he could go. This con with Pan Am specifically went on for 11 months. 11 months. And then he just kind of felt like he was like, he was cutting it kind of close. So he decided to like retire in Georgia. He decided to retire in Atlanta. So he's filling out a lease for an apartment in Atlanta. On the lease it says occupation. And he puts doctor. He almost put pilot down, but he definitely didn't want the leasing office calling Pan Am and be like, hey, do you like know this guy? He befriended one of his like apartment neighbors. You're a doctor? I'm a doctor. That's crazy. She's like, I got this friend that like needs a little help. And Frank's like, what do you mean? I literally just need you to observe interns and make sure like that nobody dies. Frank's like, I guess I could do that. Frank starts working at a hospital as a doctor and he's probably 17 at the time. He's just charming. Everybody's loving him, just obsessed. They're like, oh my God, I like cute Leonardo DiCaprio doctor. Like, he's so cute. Oh my God. At first, it was just like, can you just do this for a night? Can you just take my shift? But then he just kind of kept coming back and coming back. And again, getting more and more confident. Very, very arrogant. It's one thing to do it once and to like fly by the seat of your pants, but then to like really not question anything you do. So he grew more confident. And kept going and actually kept learning and researching and trying to understand what was actually happening. And then he literally was asked to stay on as a temporary doctor. And he took the job. If he didn't know answers and he was just like, I get asked this question a lot, he'd go and study in the medical library. And honestly, like, he was learning a lot. And it was more than like I probably would have learned. And that's annoying because he was still a teenager, but still that means his brain was absorbing things. Like my brain absorbed things too when I was a teenager, but not when I turned 26. Which is what happens. But again, bless his little heart, when he actually came up against people who needed actual help from a doctor, he was like, brr, did not know what to do. Once he was putting other people's lives in danger, he couldn't fly by the seat of his pants anymore. So at least he had a little bit of foresight to stop and to move it on to someone, to an intern who actually might have known. But he got fucking lucky because if an intern didn't know and there were no other doctors around on the late shift, someone could have died. The scope of what he was dealing with became too big for him, and so he decided to bounce. Then he decided, I was a pilot, I was a security guard for a day, I was doctor, I guess I'll move on to being an attorney next. During all these times, Frank was kind of like in and out with like falling in love with like different ladies. He was a true ladies man, really just looking for that love, really trying to fill that void. Money's trying to fill it, lavish lifestyle's trying to fill it. Frank, what if we just started working on ourselves? Work on yourself.
Why about yourself?
One woman actually from California, like he told her everything that was happening and she was just like, that was dumb. Why did you tell me that? Now I'm going to tell the police. And she told the FBI what was happening. So like they were kind of trying to get more of a paper trail of where Frank Abagnale was coming from. He knew this woman from his Pan Am days, which were months ago. He was just like, oh, lady from Pan Am that lives in Louisiana, whom I love. I'm tired of that pilot's game. Like, I'm tired of being a pilot, and I wish I could use my law degree. And she's like, oh my God, that's crazy that you said that because I have a lawyer friend in town that maybe you could work at his firm. All you gotta do is just pass the Louisiana bar test, but that shouldn't be too hard since you went to Harvard. Sure, why not? Funny enough, the only true thing about Frank, he passed the Louisiana bar. He studied for weeks and weeks, and this man, I'm just telling you, this boy, He's just able to absorb very intricate little details. And so within a few weeks, he passed the bar and started working as an attorney. What? He didn't last too long because there's this one guy, this one Harvard alum that also worked at the firm, and he was like, I smell a rat.
Hey, like, can we be friends, like, and talk all, like, fun things like Harvard?
Yeah, sure. That sounds cool.
Oh my god, like, don't you just, like, love Harvard?
Yeah.
Don't you just, like, love, like, this like, certain hallway that's, like, named after this, like, certain guy?
Yeah, it's like such a great hallway.
Huh. That hallway doesn't exist anymore, honey.
He was trying to get him all these things because he knew, he was just like, something's up. Something's up with this kid.
I don't trust you.
And no matter how charming Frank was, he just kind of couldn't get it by on this guy. This guy had also actually like reported Frank, and they were gonna do a background check on him. And so Frank bounced. He had already resigned because he was like, something's happening. And so he was attorney for a full 8 months. Then there was another time, I didn't really find much information on it, but he also pretended to be a professor at BYU. Bring him young, bring him young. Everything was just starting to get like, all these calls were just starting to get like a little too close. And Frank was just like, I need to go back to something that's comfortable, something that like I know I do really well, something that like I thrive at. So he goes back to Pan Am, but he was like, I gotta go about this differently. I'm heading into retirement because I'm like actually close to 20 years old, and I'm just like tired. I just like need to retire. Girl, same. I gotta figure out a way to like close this beautiful chapter in my like sweet baby life. Just like in the movie and in the musical, he takes on 8 college girls to be flight attendants. And Am was just like, this is such a great idea. Like, fake Frank, like, we should just give you a shit ton of money and you can like go on this huge PR trip with all these pretty girls and their long legs. Go on this influencer trip. So he spends literally over $300,000 out of Pan Am's pocket. He was just like, I guess I can retire now. And I just feel bad. Like, I hope that those girls like weren't like left to the dust. Like, I'm just like, what happened to them? Where's their story? I want to hear their end of it. So, you know, at age 21, Frank decides to retire in this like sweet little baby like French town, which is like oddly close to where his mother was born. You have mommy issues. Okay, so the little town he was in was called Montpellier. Really only briefly mentioned the FBI. They're on his tail. They're like, something's happening. We're gonna find him. Tom Hanks' character, Sean O'Reilly, but in real life, his name was Joseph Shea. And Joseph Shea, it's like, he didn't want to be named fully because, I mean, you're getting schooled by a kid. Like, how embarrassing. You're getting schooled by this kid. He finally gets caught and imprisoned in France during his retirement. How upsetting. How upsetting. But he was actually caught by French police. An Air France employee spotted him and reported him to French police. Or I have another source that said a French woman who, yet again, Frank had spilled all of his information to, turned him in. And Frank was wanted in like so many countries at this point. The French police were like, we got him. And the French were very proud about that. They arrested him and he spent 6 months in French police custody. After 6 months, he was extradited back to the United States. He did escape via plane. Like, he ran on the tarmac. I'm sorry, I haven't eaten yet, and I feel like I'm like losing train of thought. He's an escapee now. Like, he's a federal escapee, and he evades capture for a couple of weeks. Now he was trying to get out of the United States and go to Canada, and then he gets caught at the Montreal airport. So he's like caught, and they're like, Frank, get in the car, and he goes to prison. I didn't know this, but that Frank escapes prison again. I think at this point, like, the federal agent, Shea, was kind of like feeling bad for Frank, who had literally gotten away with everything. But he was just like, Frank's just a sad kid whose parents don't love him. And so they like were treating Frank special, like special treatment, walking him into the jail, like really like being dainty with his handcuffs. Like, oh my God, like, can you imagine?
Flames on the side of my face.
So while he's in jail, guards are actually like, they're treating this guy like really well. Like, that's so strange. Maybe he's a prison inspector and he's like doing an inside job. And so they treated him real well. And so Frank decided, these guys are a bunch of dum-dums. I'm going to take advantage of this situation now. So while he's in prison, he contacts this girl that like he had a fling with, who was like super loyal to him. Like, he was kind of a cult leader when you think about it. Hot take. And her name was Jean Seaspring. Okay, this part I'm going to read kind of from my script because it was a little confusing. But he was just like, hey, girl, how you doing? I got to get out of this prison. It's like super stuffy in here, and I deserve so much better. Want to help me out? And she's like, yeah, I love you so much. Jean, not Sean. Wild Jean. I think her name is Jean Seaspring. Yeah, okay. So Jean was like, Jean was a sneaky bitch. She got a business card from a real person, an Inspector C.W. Dunlap. Somehow nabbed this while she was impersonating a freelance writer. And she was probably interviewing this guy and was like, oh my God, you're an inspector? She was probably like, let me get your number so I can call you. And he was like, oh my God, pretty girl, oh my God. She slips Frank this C.W. Dunlap business card. And she's like, that's your identity. And he's like, cool, I am now C.W. Dunlap. Okay. This one's confusing. He gets his FBI agent's name on a stack of like more business cards to make it look official. And a number that would actually connect to a phone booth in like a mall. When the time was right and he needed to call the number, it wouldn't actually be Joseph Shea. It would be this number that he had created. So since Frank had caught on to the idea that the guards thought that Frank was actually like a prison inspector, one day Frank was just like, hey guards, guess what? You were right. And they're like, oh shit, I'm so smart. This is my card. I'm actually Inspector C.W. Dunlap. And they're like, dope name. And he's just like, got it from my mama. I need to give a report to my guy on the other side. FBI agent Joseph Shea. I need to call him. Okay, you can call him. Remember, the number on the card is not actually Joseph Shea. It's the number of a phone booth at a shopping mall that Jean would sit by at all day waiting for this call. So she would pick up the phone and impersonate this FBI guy, which I'm just like, how did they not know? Hi, I'm the secretary. I'll connect you to Officer John, like Officer Shea. And like on the phone, she'd be like, oh my God, C.W. Dunlap, we totally need to meet up and talk about what's happening in the prison in my car. And he's like, oh my God, FBI agent, that's real. Guys, like, the FBI agent is telling me I gotta go meet him in a car and talk. And they're like, oh my God, like an FBI agent at our prison? That is so cool. Let him go. Let him go talk to his friend in the car. You're not gonna con me, are you? And Frank is just like, no, I'm a real prison inspector. Frank and Jean pieced. They got in the car and they sped away. The guards were just like, what? Yet again, he jumps on a Greyhound bus and he is on his way to New York City. And then he trained to DC and then made his way back up to New York in order to go to Brazil. Are we following? We're doing like this. The way in which he gets caught is so fucking dumb. And he's literally like outside the Waldorf Astoria, you know, not trying to like put in a low profile. He still loves a lavish lifestyle. So he's outside the Waldorf Astoria, probably just like looking up, thinking about, I did it. I did it. He's so arrogant. He's so full of himself. And literally like these two, Elliot and Stabler of SVU. Hey, isn't that Frank Abagnale just like standing outside the Waldorf Astoria right now? Isn't he supposed to be in prison? Yeah, that's totally Frank. Mariska Hargitay is literally like getting a hot dog on the side of the street and just goes, hey, Frank Abagnale. And Frank, being the narcissist that he is, literally goes like, hey, Frank, do you want to put the handcuffs on yourself, you dum-dum? Put back in prison. And he pleaded guilty because it was just like, at that point, put a muzzle on them. Like, he's so guilty, it's outrageous. So he's sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. And they're like, tape him to the ground. While he's in prison, the FBI are like, he was really smart. Here's a crazy thought. What if we like made Frank work for us? And it would be dumb to like let his smarts go to waste. And so after 7 years in prison, Frank is released under the ruling that he would use his powers for good and help the FBI. And so at 26 years old, he starts actually helping the FBI catch people like him. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. The main person to like help him get on this job was Shay. But I will say that Shay was the guy that was like, oh, no, he's not gonna get paid. No, you're not gonna get paid for this work. You've already taken the money. I will say that. Good on you, Shay. Don't let him get paid. But then they were just like literally besties for all time. Like, can you imagine that show? Frank and Shay, Abagnale, wait, it was Abagnale all along. I did it! I somehow got it in. He's insidious. Ha ha! Academy Award goes to Frank Abagnale because for 5 years he played a pilot, a doctor, a sociology professor at Brigham Young, and a lawyer. He laundered $2.5 million in fraudulent money in 26 different countries. But Frank said that if he was using today's technologies to do this same exact scam, he thinks that he could have laundered between $20 and $50 million. He traveled to 26 different countries, traveled over 1 million miles, and it would have been apparently 40 trips around the earth for free. So after he went to prison, after he paid off his debts with the FBI, he tried to work many different jobs, wouldn't disclose that he had a criminal past, but it would always come back up and bite him in the ass, and he was fired on the spot. The only way to kind of make money, and make money honestly, was to actually help people with the skills that he had. He would work with banks and other companies to spot how people were being fraudulent. He was starting to gain a name for himself as being honest, and he would be referred to other banks and other companies. If you want someone to help you get out of a con, you gotta ask an actual con artist. Frank was just like, if you don't like the services that I provide, and if I'm not helping you, you don't have to pay me. He decided to start his own consulting company called Abagnale and Associates. But he would go on to write books, appear on TV, TED Talks. He has a podcast now. Frank Abagnale is still alive. He lives in Charleston, South Carolina, with his wife, Kelly, and his 3 sons. He actually met his wife while he was doing undercover work for the FBI. She literally met him while he was impersonating someone else, but he was just like, by the way, I work for the FBI. And I was actually a con artist. Like, can you imagine that first date? She was probably just like, the eldest son actually went to law school and became an FBI agent. Full circle. Different TV shows that he appeared on, To Tell the Truth, which was like a big, like, guess who's lying type of show. In 1977, The Tonight Show. He was actually in Catch Me If You Can. He didn't want a big part. He was just like, oh no, not me. Played one of the French officers that arrests Leonardo DiCaprio in the film, which I thought was fun. His whole life's work was basically put into this book, Catch Me If You Can. In 1980, the book was released, and Steven Spielberg, like, bought that shit up fast. But it actually only took him about 22 years to make the film, and it's one of Spielberg's most underrated films. The movie was released on Christmas Day in 2002. And Abagnale went on to say, I was interviewed by the co-writer only about 4 times. I believe he did a great job of telling the story, but he also over-dramatized and exaggerated some of the story. The book and the movie, and to go on the musical, were only about 80% accurate, according to Frank. Are we being conned again? Double con, a con of a con of a con? Finally, we're just gonna talk about that musical real quick. So the musical, Catch Me If You Can, premiered on April 10th, 2011, and it only had 150 performances. Didn't do great. I saw the Tony's performance, and Norbert Leo Butz definitely deserved that Tony. He was amazing. I loved his interpretation of, like, this bumbling FBI agent with a heart of gold. So he won for Best Actor. Aaron Tveit was also in it. He played Frank Abagnale Jr. He played at the Neil Simon Theater. Music was by Mark Sharman. Lyrics were also by Sherman and Scott Whitman. Book by Terrence McNally. This show didn't hit the way they wanted to. It went on to Broadway, played in South Korea, played in Japan and the US, and had a US tour, which was actually, from what I read, was only a non-ec tour, which makes me think y'all weren't even paying for union. So it must not have done well. The show just had a lot of mixed reviews. The story starts out with Frank getting arrested and then going back and being like, well, I was arrested, but let me tell you my story. Which is weird because it's like, that seems like it's a trope in a bunch of these musicals that I've been covering, where we're kind of getting like a later perspective of the show rather than it happening in the moment. We saw it happening in Bonnie and Clyde. It starts out with them, the shootout, and then we go back and see how did they get here. And then we also kind of see it in Lizzie Borden with, like, in the house of Borden, there's a lock on every door. So although that kind of seems like it takes place more in the present, but I mean, attend the tale of Sweeney Todd, like, we're kind of we're regaling the tale rather than being in the moment and living through that character through the moments. I just thought that was interesting. And most of the time, a lot of these shows don't tend to do very, very well. Bonnie and Clyde also flopped. This, 150 performances, I would kind of consider that a flop. It didn't stick around too long. It did win a Tony, you know, so there were good things that came out of it. In the 1960s TV style, so it was as if the whole thing was being done in television, which seemed to be in the style that Charman wrote because he also did Hairspray, so he seemed to really feel comfortable writing in that type of style. But it just confused a lot of people. Like, why tell it through this aesthetic? Like, it just doesn't really work. The story of Frank Abagnale is juicy enough, just hit the story hard. It's not hitting the mark enough. It's very visually like cool to see. Like the costumes were gorgeous. The dances were really good. And like all the dancers, like all the costumes were like leggy. We get like Rockette like legs. And so they're smashing it. They're smashing the numbers. How does this fit in with the musical? Which for a musical, to have people be like, I don't understand how the music fits. Musical numbers just come out of nowhere. Where I feel like when theater people say that and critics say like, that's such a slap in the face. Because that's the whole point of a musical, is that like, you're like, oh yeah, suspend your disbelief. Of course we're gonna have a musical number here right now to continue the story. A lot of people just didn't feel like it continued the story. It just took people out of the story for a second just to have a musical number. It was just wild to have that kind of like argument. The music just kind of felt like elevator music, people would say. And I'm not gonna lie, I've listened to some of it and I'm like, I can't get through this. Like, it's just like, ugh. I personally just didn't like it. Like, hot take, I just didn't like it. It was boring to me. I was just like, wow, this musical just doesn't slap. And so when I read these articles, I was like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy. For some reason, I thought people really loved it, but maybe I was just talking to old people because maybe they just loved it. Not every movie, not every book needs to be made into a musical. It's a story about another white guy that just got away with everything, got caught, had a bit of a slap on the wrist for a couple years, but then ended up on top. It was just felt like we were celebrating like straight male whiteness. And for even Broadway, the great white way, to go, this is boring. Like that, I feel like that says a lot. My favorite quote that I saw about it, I was like, ooh, like I saw like that meme where everybody's like, oh, what should have been a fun lark of a story seems almost stodgy, like your grandmother's idea of a good time. That is rough. It was just too like cutesy, I guess. Like they were like, if you're gonna do it, you better make that musical slap and make me feel something, because otherwise it's just a boring story about the type of person we hear all the time, just like a white guy getting away with everything. That is the story of Frank Abagnale Jr. and Catch Me If You Can. Wild. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to see more Bloody Broadway, the combination of true crime and the Broadway world, please stay tuned. Please continue to watch. Please give this video a big old like, big old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button. Don't smash it. Don't break it. There's no need to smash it. But just tap it. Just give it a nice, like, consensual, like, hi, I consent. I would like to subscribe to her channel. So please go check out below. I have this little, I've been inspired by Smokey Glow, one of my favorite creators here on YouTube for a while. Have like a little social justice corner, a little space. Please go check that out. And I'll have other links and petitions that you can sign down below, or places that you'd like to donate to help. Any little bit helps, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna go have some Taco Bell. I will see y'all in my next one as we close out most of these videos, at least still for the time being. Give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends. I'm done now. I'm done now.